Peace, love, and Reiki. Welcome to Global Reiki Webinars. It's, it's June 22nd, 2018, at least on this side of the planet. It may be a different day for you wherever you are, and certainly a different day for you if you're watching the replay on YouTube sometime in the future. And welcome. We are going to be talking about regenerative thinking and how it relates to Reiki. And as some of your questions in advance came in, we will certainly be talking about what regenerative thinking is. I'll be receiving some of this teaching, though we've been hearing about it for quite some time. It's something that Phyllis has been involved in and references in many of the talks that she's given on Global Reiki Webinars over the last few years, and certainly over the last year. And so today she's going to talk with us about what that is, what she's actually referring to when she says regenerative thinking, and also what it has to do with Reiki. And we got less questions in advance today because I think many of you were just wondering what regenerative thinking is. And so what that means is it's possible that those of you who are with us live will have a bit more of an opportunity to write in your questions as this is unfolding. We'll do our best to get to you and acknowledge you while we're going. And speaking of that, I'm so excited that there are so many of you here. Hello to Natalia from Moscow, Tatiana Luna in Croatia, Bander from Saudi. Hello, Ursula in Switzerland, Galina Elena in Odessa, Ukraine. Hello, Philippe in Canada, Reiki in Denmark, Andra in Holland, Poke in Orcas Island, Charlotta in the Netherlands, Kristen in Wales, Heather in the UK, hello, Jeannie in New Mexico, hi, Lavina in the Navajo Nation. Welcome to Global Reiki Webinars. And what I'm hoping you are gathering is that this truly is a global community. Global Reiki Webinars is a project by myself. My name is Rachel Goldberg. Welcome. And the woman next to me is Phyllis Furumoto, who is the lineage bearer and grandmaster of Usui Shiki Ryoho, which is the lineage of Reiki that goes through Mikao Usui, Chijiro Hayashi, Hawayo Takata, and Phyllis Furumoto, who's the spiritual lineage bearer. And if you're curious about that, we've done a webinar in the past called What is Lineage? And you can look that up on YouTube or in our Facebook group, which is called Global Reiki Webinars. The pinned post in that group lists many of our past programs if you're curious about what lineage and what spiritual lineage is as I'm saying that. So, wow. I'm so excited to be here. And hi, Daniel in Romania and Rachel in Jerusalem. Hi, Nuno in Portugal and Layla in Qatar. Yeah, so excited to be here. And for those of you who are with us live, I'm really grateful that you found us and were able to get here, and appreciate your patience as I had some technical mix-ups with our links earlier this week. So I really appreciate you sticking it out and making it here. So, wow, all of that is to say that we're a global community and we connect online and receive teachings every 4 to 6 weeks from Phyllis in this format through these webinars that we do. And we usually pick a different topic and have Q&A throughout. And of course, Reiki. And there's also the Facebook group. If you're not yet part of the Global Reiki Webinars Facebook group, I recommend you look it up, go on over there and join the discussion. So if there's anything that really moves you or that you're left having some wondering or questioning about, bring it to the group. We've been having some really fascinating and active dialogues in that group over the last couple of months, and I'm really excited for you to join us over there and continue the conversation. So one other thing before we begin in Reiki is that we offer this for the global Reiki community as a gift of the heart. And we also happily receive gifts from you if you like this experience, if you want us to be able to continue doing this for a long, long time and looking at different ways to better serve the community. There is an opportunity for you to send a monetary donation or gift to us through PayPal. And I will post that link up after we begin Reiki, and it'll be up throughout the broadcast. If you click the button, it opens in a different window so you won't lose us. And if you're watching the replay on YouTube, I'll be sure to include that link below in the description as soon as we're done broadcasting. So thank you for listening through those announcements. I feel like that took a little bit longer than I typically am able to get through them in. And let's begin. Actually, I'll turn it over to Phyllis to begin us with some Reiki. So, Phyllis.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And good morning. Well, for me, it's morning still. And thanks a lot for joining us, whether it's live or at some other date. So I'd like to have us all join together and with a few moments of Reiki. So if it's your practice to self-treat, then we will do self-treatment. And I encourage you to close your eyes and visualize us all being together. I usually go to a favorite outdoor scenario that I like, and depending on where I am, and you can do the same wherever you like. We'll have global circles all over the world. So please join us in Reiki. Thank you. Thank you. Ah, wow. Hard to come back. I'd like to welcome you all, and I'm going to put my glasses back on because I'd like to see what I've written. And let's see, let me just kind of back up. We had hoped this time to have a guest with us. And he was not able to be here this time. And he helped produce the videos that were online for the last year or so, called Reconciliation. And Renee was a really wonderful person who came into my life, much like Rachel, by chance, so to speak. We connected and we produced these videos that had to do with allowing us as individuals to come together and to somehow be able to have our differences and still come to a place where we can understand that there is also a place of being at one with each other in Reiki, in our Reiki practice, and also taking the opportunity to understand what our differences are, because maybe they're not so different. Excuse me. And the way that I actually came to this place of reconciliation was something called regenerative thinking. So that was how I wanted to use this time together with you. And then Renee was not able to be with us. So then we shifted it to what does Reiki have to do with regenerative thinking, or what does regenerative thinking have to do with Reiki? And I'd like to come into this through my own experience. And I want to start way before I knew anything about regenerative thinking, so that you can understand and see the process that drew me to discovering another way of thinking about my life, about my relationships, and about what the practice of Reiki is. So as I began to practice Reiki in 1980, many questions came to my mind. And as I went through these experiences in my personal practice and my teaching practice, many of these questions were answered by Reiki, as you probably well know. For instance, I started out treating people who were losing their eyesight from having diabetes. And, as I was treating them, I was thinking to myself, well, am I expecting their eyesight to return? Am I expecting a miracle? What happened if their eyesight didn't change, or if they still became blind? And was this about Reiki failing? And after a few years of, thinking about these questions, I realized that my idea of healing, because I called this Japanese healing art, my idea of healing really was more like curing, like the concept of curing. And the stories that I heard from Hawayo Takata Sensei seemed like stories of curing. So it was not a great leap in my linear mind to say that if a person was not cured, then Reiki failed. But the next question that always came up was, how could Reiki fail? Because Hawayo Takata Sensei also said that Reiki is always working and works on the source of the problem or condition. So how could it fail? So this confusion and going around and around lasted for many, many, many years. And I believe that though I've answered many questions on many levels about this particular topic in Reiki, I'm still working on another level, of course. And then I eventually arrived at another question, which was, what am I really offering? Like, I was thinking about my teaching. Am I offering a way to cure people? Am I training practitioners who can go out and heal people or cure people. And how could I do that in a weekend? And that was really a big question, especially from the UK, where spiritual healing is a very accepted means of training, but it takes years to do it. And they were really offended that we were offering this, in a weekend. So was there a difference between healing and curing? And when I called Reiki healing, was I trying to soften or downplay the times when Reiki did not seem to work and that I couldn't explain it, right? Because I was supposed to have an explanation. Then as Reiki practice progressed into the late 1990s, the interest in Reiki treatments becoming a part of many different plans for cancer treatment and for HIV treatment, for brain damage care, and so on. This became more and more prevalent. And the question then became very important. What are we offering? Are we offering comfort and support? Are we offering an opening or supportive space for healing with an emphasis on our personal definition of healing? How can we clearly differentiate between our intention of curing or our intention of healing, and so on? So you can see that my questions were just out there and pretty much unanswerable. And just as I was feeling kind of this very crescendo of a confusion and unclarity, I was introduced to something called regenerative thinking. And over the last 10 years, it has really taken hold in me, and I'm still working on seeing the subtle differences in my life and in how it affects my way of holding Reiki as a practice. And also, I just see that it puts all these questions into a very different context, which has eased my confusion, eased my unclarity, and I feel like allowed more understanding. So that's my history with regenerative thinking and practice. And I really want to say that your questions, again, really followed a wonderful progress. And so I'm going to start with a prompt from some of your questions. First of all, of course, what is regenerative thinking? So I'd like to do a kind of big sweep about regenerative thinking and then get to a bit more of specifics. When I go to the internet and I Google regenerative thinking, it's the things that come up often are applied to economic thinking or natural resource development or sustainable community direction. And when I think of these, the image that I hold is regenerative thinking could be simplified into the image of a spiral where, as you know, in Reiki, we work on an issue and we keep revisiting it, but each time we revisit it, it comes more and more to ourselves, and it becomes clearer and less difficult to hold, and there's less confusion. So the spiral is So these issues that we work with in Reiki are not goals to resolve, but are things that are accompanying us as we develop as a human being. In mechanical thinking, and this is the kind of thinking that we were educated in, that we are engulfed in our daily life, and that we are used to using in contemplating our whole life and our relationships. And mechanical thinking is thinking rigidly through a set number of steps. So this came with the kind of mechanical age, the industrial age, where instead of someone having a gift, like having a gift of, say, blacksmithing, and developing that gift through gaining the skill, and then becoming more and more developed as a blacksmith, and then serving the community through that art. We ended up in the industrial age taking that art and taking it down into a series of steps that was on a oh dear, I've lost the word. A line where something was built, and one person did one step, and then another person added another step, another person added another step, until it was mechanically put together instead of created. And this kind of thinking really has entered into how we think about ourselves, our value of ourselves, the value of our relationships, the way that Reiki works. And we'll get back to that. In addition, regenerative thinking assumes that everything is a living entity, and so has a life of its own, has a developmental process of its own. And some of those developmental processes, like the earth, is a very, kind of gets drawn out in our time frame, but it's still a developmental process. And in mechanical thinking, it applies life to only part of the universe. So, for instance, it's very interesting right now what's happening in my head about global warming. So, yes, we human beings have hurried up global warming anyway through the process of, our carbon emissions. And my question for myself is, well, aren't we a part of this living entity called the human race? And in our universe, in our Earth universe, we are a part of that living entity and are a part of the development of this planet. And so we could say that we are harming the planet, but instead, could we be a part of the planet, and what difference would that make if the planet were not a victim, but the planet was a living entity with a life of its own, including us being a part of it? So this is just another question that I have around this. So going to another piece, phrases associated with regenerative thinking are things like circular design, moving from sustainable to regenerative, having relationship with everything. Phrases associated with mechanical thinking are right and wrong, logical progression, predictable outcome. So hopefully you're getting a feeling of the difference between mechanical thinking as we were brought up and trained to how to think and how to resolve issues and problems in our life. And then regenerative thinking, which has arisen from people asking, how can we take the next step in our human development? Is what we are experiencing in our mechanical world, is this part of the natural world? And I believe that as human beings, we're really moving toward becoming a part of nature again. And this regenerative thinking label is something that allows us to name this movement back to nature. So I'm just wondering what's happening with the chat room, because I can't talk and read the chat at the same time. So I'd like to just stop here and ask Rachel if there's something, if there are questions that I should address before I move on to the questions that were asked.
It doesn't look like there are questions. Rachel acknowledged that she was a little bit distracted when we started, but when we were practicing Reiki, she felt it and had a pull to come back and really join the group. And then we have, I'm just thanking people as I see that there are monetary donations coming in. And one person is having a connection problem. Jenny responded to what you were saying, and she said it's kind of right brain and left brain function.
Possibly, but I don't know right brain, and I don't know what she's, what that refers to. So, Jenny, as we go along, if you could update me, that would be great. Good.
Cool.
Thanks. Okay, let's go to the first question.
Okay. So our first question that came in advance is from Jane, and we're right on time. Just want to give those of you who are with us live a little insight into our agenda. We've got about an hour, just under an hour for Q&A, and we have 6 questions that came in advance that we will address. And this is typically less than come in, which is on the one hand, great, because we don't always have time to get through the questions that come in, but also I can imagine spending, the full hour with these questions, but also those of you who are with us live, and we've got over 100 of you who are with us right now. As Phyllis is talking, if there are questions that come to you and you want to type them in, we'll also be checking to respond to that. So the first question that came in advance is from Jane. And Jane wrote, "What is regenerative thinking? I have only found references to regenerative thinking and economic systems online."
Great. So, since money is such a wonderful means of testing the way that we think, I find it really exciting that regenerative thinking is showing up in the new economics and the new way to approach money, which is through which is about reciprocal relationship with money. So, do I want to get into this? No, I'm not going to get into this now because it's too complicated, and maybe I can do this as I go on later on. Sorry to be so sorry. Okay, I'm going to restart, and I want to just answer her first question. which is, what is regenerative thinking? So the best way that I have found to offer understanding about regenerative thinking is to not just to compare it to mechanical thinking, which is the way that we usually think, not in a way that says one way's right and one way's wrong, but just to understand the shift that could take place if we were willing to embrace regenerative thinking. And it doesn't mean that mechanical thinking doesn't work or that it's not a valid way to think, because, if we go to IKEA and get a piece of furniture and we need to put it together, the mechanical little diagram that they give you of one step, another step, and another step is really useful. The point is that most of us don't have a choice about how we think. We only think in this mechanical way, and I can speak for myself anyway. And now what's happening with me is that I have a choice. And when I choose regenerative thinking, or I find myself locked into mechanical thinking and I can't move out of a place, then regenerative thinking is often a way out of a place where I feel really stuck. So we're looking at finding choices about how we think. And this applies to everything that we experience in Reiki. So there are these 5 questions that, when are asked, will give you an understanding of how we would use this in mechanical thinking and how this is referred to in regenerative thinking. So I'm hoping that this will help you. And I'm going to actually copy this and put this into the chat in these different paragraphs, because I think it'll be easier for you to see in the chat. And we can also put this up online. So I'm going to try to do this.
So for those of you on YouTube, if you're watching live, I apologize, we're not able to make this text available to you, but if you're watching the replay, I will also do my best to find this text and include it in the description below. So if you'd like to read along with us and you're watching in the future, which is your present, hello, here now, and scroll down and take a look at it there.
Okay, the first question. Am I looking at parts and pieces, or am I working from wholes? That's WHOLES. In English, it means from completeness, from whole. In the mechanical systems, you can swap and replace parts and pieces in more generic ways, like car parts, for instance, and not so much in living systems. Living systems, or wholes, are much more than the sum of their component elements and demand an understanding of and respect for their unique essence. So this last phrase, demand an understanding of and respect for their unique essence, refers to the component elements. So for instance, if there's a group of people who are working together and they're like a committee, so, what is important in that committee is not to say, oh, one person has the truth about the bank account, one person has the truth about how to work with the publicity. One person has the truth about something else that's needed. That's kind of working with parts and pieces. If you look at the committee and you see that everyone has strengths and also challenges, and they have their unique way of expressing it, the whole or the whole committee will actually hold the truth of everything, because it's not the expert in bookkeeping that really holds the truth of money. Money is much more than just the information. Money is also about feeling. It's about integrity. It's about reciprocity. It's about all these different things, and these will show up in the whole of the committee. So the whole becomes then much more than the sum of these people who are involved in the committee. So that's one way to visualize it. I'm hoping that clarifies it. And I'm wondering if there are any questions from the group.
Yeah, so there's one new question that came in and some clarification from Jenny. She said the left side of the brain is responsible for controlling the right side of the body. It also performs tasks that have to do with logic, such as in science and mathematics. On the other hand, the right hemisphere coordinates the left side of the body and performs tasks that have to do with creativity and the arts. And then she added mechanical thinking equals left, right equals regenerative thinking, sort of LOL. And I marked that as a question because I want to check in if that feels congruent for you, Phyllis.
I have to think about it because I have two trains of thought, and I want to complete this, and then I'll come back to this question, okay?
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Another question came from Bianca.
Mm-hmm.
And Bianca said, how is regenerative thinking applied in a Reiki healing session?
I'd like to answer that question later.
Okay.
Okay, because I'd like to see if she can answer the question herself after I go through these 5 questions.
Okay.
All right, great. Okay, so the next question is, I'm just wanting to post it now. Yeah. Okay, the next question is, am I trying to arrest disorder, or am I trying to enliven and support evolution? I just love this question because, you know, sometimes in meetings or in conferences or in events, I just want to, you know, make sure that everything is together and looks controlled and in order. And this concept that disorder, or what I think is disorder, may be evolution, like evolution happening. So it doesn't mean evolution like global evolution in that sense. It could, but in this case, I'm looking at evolution of the community that's there. So like when I have an event that lasts for 3 days, then you know there's an evolution of that group that happens, and when it feels like it's out of my control, then I go back to this question and say, oh, this I want to support because it's evolution. It's something living, and living things are not mechanical. They are often what we would call chaotic, and often chaotic and not orderly. So the other part of this is mechanical systems tend to run down over time, like a car has a lifetime. And then living systems evolve as long as energy continues to cycle through them. Trying to stop perceived chaos can be a fruitful and damaging approach with living systems. So let's think about that for a moment. Like, living systems evolve as long as energy continues to cycle through them. So I'm thinking, for instance, for some of you who teach Reiki classes, I've noticed that in Reiki classes, each class is different because, of course, the people are different, and so the community or that particular whole is different because the elements are different of the whole. And that, as we share the initiations, as we share Reiki treatments together, as we tap in consciously to this energy, the energy just evolves us and often creates a kind of chaotic experience, especially sometimes in the classes where it seems like everybody just wants to talk to each other and nobody wants to sit down in the class. And there's a part of that I feel like is really useful to, instead of trying to control the class, to ask, is this important for you? Are you gaining important understandings about Reiki that is not possible to get in any other way? And that's been a very interesting thought process for me, and also to just ask people, is this important to you? Or shall we go back to my class outline and see if that also can give you value? So I hope this is making sense, and I'm wondering if there are any questions of clarification about this.
I don't see any.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Rachel, you're welcome to just jump in when you want.
Okay. I feel like with this one, I am really learning. And it's interesting in this role where I'm technical support, I'm, monitoring different things going on at once and also listening and learning. I read the part in your last question that said, trying to stop perceived chaos can be a fruitless and damaging approach with living systems. And so I heard that and heard it again I read that and then heard it when you spoke it while I am doing multiple things. And I was like, okay, this is regenerative to be
right.
in, present with several different things occurring at once.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Okay, here's number 3. Okay. Well, I thought it was. Here we go. Okay. Am I putting my attention to relative comparisons, or am I trying to ground in what is? So, generalizations quickly lead to an inability to intelligently respond to and work with living systems because of the relative nature of comparison. Accepting what is just so allows us to relate to living systems without illusion. Living systems are complex and unique and not prone to responding to best practices or prescriptions. Living systems, including us as human beings, respond to being seen as just so without analysis and judgment. So this is a little bit maybe confusing, I don't know, but I'll just say a few words about this. So some of you might remember my talking about relative universe, absolute universe. And this is what the question is. Am I in the relative universe? Am I constantly comparing myself with other people? Am I constantly comparing this treatment, this Reiki treatment, and how effective it seemed against another Reiki treatment? Am I always comparing my form of practice with another person's form of practice? Or can I accept what I have? Can I accept what's happening and just be in that moment? And when I'm able to do this, it means that I am a part and in relationship to a living system like another person or to the energy of Reiki without my filters, without my usual judgments about what's right and wrong, what feels better. So, you know, I think all have this experience of the absolute universe, this moving from the relative universe to the absolute universe. And I like this example of somebody comes like in a Reiki class and everybody pairs up, you know, in my Reiki classes anyway, to give each other treatments during the class. Often, like all groups, there's one person that people are not really excited about being paired off with. But what happens is that the moment that that person is being treated, whatever it is in that person that is a relative thing that people don't like or don't feel safe with, or whatever that is, that quality is, just goes away. Because when we're giving Reiki, when we are putting energy into a system, what happens is we just see what's so. We see what's in front of us. And Reiki, and this working with Reiki allows us these moments without our filters, without our, well, I don't like people with black hair. I don't like treating, I don't like teachers, excuse me. So, and so on, you know, those go away in the treatment. And then we are able to be in the just so. So this is what this is speaking about. And relative comparisons are associated with mechanical thinking, and being present, being just in the just so, is associated with regenerative thinking.
I want to say for anyone listening that what Phyllis was referring to about the absolute world, the relative world and the absolute world, if you're interested in hearing her talk more about that, it's in the webinar we did called The Role of Money in the Practice of Reiki, part 1. That was a 2-part webinar we did because not surprisingly, there were many, many questions about this topic. So if you want to hear more about that after you finish with this one, that's where you'll find it, is The Role of Money in the Practice of Reiki, part 1. And I have another thought that I think I'll hold until we're through these 5 questions that Phyllis is sharing. And it does not look like there are other questions, but people are saying this makes complete sense, Phyllis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, let's go for the next one. Oh, I did it twice, sorry. Let's see. Can I edit this? Oh, yeah. Well, no, I can't.
So the
anyway,
last word is properties in parentheses. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The next one. Am I trying to eliminate or minimize difference, or am I embracing it? This is such a challenge because, you know, somehow socially, I believe, and I will use the word we, and if you're not included in that we, I totally give you permission to not be a part of the we. Am I trying to eliminate or minimize difference? This is something that I feel like socially we have an understanding that being different is not okay. Or being, like I grew up with this idea, and I don't know where I got it, maybe it's just human, that I didn't want to be different, that I wanted to be the same as everybody else. But the paradox of that is that we are all individuals and that we aren't going to be the same. So I spent most of my life trying to eliminate or minimize my differences. And through Reiki, I have learned to embrace most of my differences most of the time. And the most word is increasing percentage, right? So I can say most. So at some point it was 60%, and now maybe it's 72%. And I hope before I die, I get, to 80%. Difference and diversity is the lifeblood of living systems, facilitating exchange and adaptation. Mechanical systems prefer predictability and therefore strive to reduce difference. Reducing difference and diversity in living systems robs them of their vitality. Difference is often seen as unhelpful restraint in mechanical systems. In living systems, differences are what leads to emergence. And in parentheses, this is the definition of emergence, is a process whereby larger entities, patterns, and regularities arise through interaction among smaller or simple entities that they themselves do not exhibit such properties. Okay, so that's really heavy. Let me just think how to say this more simply. So when I look at my experience of what I would call my understanding of the global Reiki community, when I'm in a small group, like my Reiki class at home in my local community, there are not so many differences in the sense that the differences become whether or not they live on the north side of town or the south side of town, or, you know what I mean? The differences are, they don't seem so large, and they're not so, they don't exhibit such restraint and I don't feel like I need to control them so much. So then when I go to Germany and then Russia and then Japan, and I visit Reiki communities in each of these countries, the differences that I see exhibited through the filters of those cultures allows me, one, to see the difference of how they've received Reiki practice and then how they are practicing themselves. And I see the similarities. And that's patterning. That's what they're calling, where larger entities, patterns, and regularities arise through the interaction among all the smaller communities, right? And then it informs larger and larger communities. But this larger community, the global Reiki community, whoever and whatever that is a living system for me. And our differences is what's going to lead to this process of emergence where we gain larger and more universal truth about our human existence and about our existence as a living entity with the earth itself. So when I catch myself, for instance, in the Facebook group these last few weeks, there's been these conversations about, differences of practice and, differences of people, how they think and how they're, combining Reiki with other things and so on. And there's a tendency in these conversations to try to minimize the differences because we all think we should be the same. I mean, that's something that as kind of automatic conditioning. However, if we really look at it, what I love about these conversations, if they don't get into kind of righteousness, is that we are embracing these differences, and in that allows this rich, vital conversation to happen because there is no right answer. And as long as we all kind of agree on that there's no right answer, we can have great conversation and a lot of it can be really different. And in that difference and in that diversity, we learn a lot about ourselves. And that's emergence. So I'm hoping that I'm really happy to be able to talk about this. This one is really one of my favorites, if I could have a favorite. Okay. We'll go to the next one, the last one.
Great, thank you.
Okay, did this come out? Yeah.
We have, am I trying to control the system or am I trying to support self-organization?
Right, another really interesting question. Am I trying to control the system or am I trying to support self-organization? Excuse me. Command and control is the essence of mechanical systems, an effort to fight perceived chaos and keep things humming along predictably. Living systems thrive on the impulse to self-organize. This requires a different kind of change management, one that supports people and groups to do what they do best and connect to the rest. So, in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, when I was practicing Reiki, the 22 masters that Hawaii Takata recognized and initiated we all had a system of practice delivered to us through the same teacher. But as a master, she taught her students individually in some ways. So each class was a bit different. As we all know, that's how Reiki comes through us and is, dispersed to our students. I concentrate more one class on one thing and don't even mention it in another class sometimes. So in the beginning, we wanted to standardize everything because it seemed like that was the thing to make it more clear. But immediately, the minute that Hawaii Takata died, there were several people who felt like they might be recognized as the Grand Master, as well as I, and especially a woman named Barbara Weber Ray. So I had to decide whether or not I could imagine controlling the system or just let it self-organize. Now, I wasn't conscious enough or even understanding enough to imagine this word self-organize or the concept of self-organization. But that's really what's happening with the Reiki and with all these different practices, is that, sure, I could have tried to control the way that people practiced, but it was obviously not going to happen. It was obviously something that I couldn't do. So I let this living system be self-organized. And I believe that in that self-organization, this explosion of all these different ways of practice Reiki, all these different forms, have allowed all these different people to come to Reiki and to practice Reiki and to get in touch with the energy of Reiki. And they wouldn't have done it if it would have been just one practice, Hawaii Takata's practice. And now what's happening is that we're going to the next level of development of self-organization, which says that, okay, let's come together. Let's reconcile who we are. Let's find those similarities that we have and embrace our differences so that we come together in a natural way, in a way where, the forest has all these different species of plants. And what we're looking for is our forest. We're in the forest, obviously, but we're kind of trying to look and own the forest for ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing. So the end of this whole discussion about definition or what is regenerative thinking for me is really about, this is what Reiki is teaching us. But what happened for me is that I had all these questions, but I couldn't, from the mechanical point of view, answer the questions. Now what I am having exciting and wonderful conversations with people about is moving some of these questions to regenerative thinking, and in doing that, understanding what Reiki is teaching me. Because Reiki is moving us from mechanical, which is kind of a man-made way of thinking, to regenerative thinking, which comes from natural systems. And so it's regenerative thinking for me is like a vehicle to allow us to understand the movement of our own personal practice, what it's moving in the development inside of us as individuals, inside of us as a system, or if you identify with the community, and us as a global community. So this for me is the basic relationship that we're looking at. And I'd love to get to some of the specific questions.
Phyllis, would you like questions that have come in on the chat or, okay.
Yeah, one or two anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to look back farther. Oh, we're going to come back to Bianca's question. Bronco said his question was answered. Layla asked, does it mean then difference in Reiki practices and the way people practice it all over the world leads to emergence and as a result brings Reiki practice to a new level? So standardization is not the best way for developing?
According to this particular definition of mechanical and regenerative thinking, standardization will be putting a Reiki system into a kind of box, which if it's not revitalized with new energy and developmental process, then it'll die, basically. And I think what we're doing is allowing the development to happen. So I'm not quite getting your question. I hope to get back to this. Yes, Layla, I mean, in a short word. So does it mean that differences in Reiki practices and the way that people practice it all over the world leads to emergence? Yes. But it will lead to emergence when people are conscious of this process. And as a result, bring Reiki practice to a new level. Yes, I believe that. So standardization is not the best way for developing. And I say yes to that too. Thank you.
Great. So, okay, I think that looks like all of our questions that came. There was the question from Bianca earlier, which is how is regenerative thinking applied in a Reiki healing session? Would you like to do that now or come back to it after the others on our agenda?
I can take it now because I think Kathy came with 3 questions, and this is the only question. She had the same question. How do you use it in a Reiki treatment? One of the things that the way the questions were asked, I had this feeling that they were asked like, how could I use regenerative thinking as a kind of technique in a Reiki treatment? I don't know if this is where your question came from, but it seemed like that might be it. And of course, it doesn't change the actual practice, my practice, but it can change my understanding of what I'm offering. Remember my questions at the beginning. So in a Reiki treatment, what am I offering? And am I saying that, okay, you came to me and you paid me a certain amount of money, that's part of the equation, and then I give you a treatment, and then the next step is you will see improvement. Or we could be even more accurate and say you will see a change eventually. So that's a kind of mechanical way of looking at the steps of someone receiving a Reiki treatment. If you look at it as an opening to people being in touch with their own living entity and being able to see the places where they are growing and where they're developing and where they're, creating conditions for emergence, then whatever happens in the treatment is much more acceptable. So it may be more acceptable to you, and therefore more acceptable to the person who's receiving the treatment. But in the sense of using it as a part of the actual practice, I would say, well, I don't think I do. But it has really helped me hold what I offer and what is received in a very different way. Thanks.
We have a new question that just came in from Eileen.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering similar things as you were talking. She said, can you delineate some of the cultural differences and similarities that you have found globally? What do you see emerging as the whole of global Reiki?
Can we hold that till the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great question.
Okay. So
Jenny?
To Jenny, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kathy, I want to acknowledge you. Thank you for submitting your question in advance. I think we addressed it through our conversation. And I think you're on with us live too. And thanks, and glad to have you here. Jenny's question was, would you agree that regenerative thinking is a vital part of being in the Reiki community? As a Usui master teacher, I have a clear understanding of Usui Reiki. Why do I need to facilitate regenerative thinking when the guidelines, etc., are very clear?
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. As I said, I feel like our Reiki practice individually and collectively is bringing us into what is labeled regenerative thinking, little by little. One of the things that was really exciting for me is I kind of got a whole big picture of regenerative thinking. So I could not only learn it like little baby step by little baby step, but I could actually consciously choose it. So if I get into a place of feeling stuck or feeling like I need to move on and I don't know what to do and so on, I go to these questions and it really helps me. And there was a lot of talk in the 1990s of Reiki not being a very mental practice, but with the 5 precepts, I find that is our mental and emotional process that is ongoing for the rest of our lives. But this really is about consciousness, consciously choosing to change the way we think so that we are able to understand the nuances and the deep, profound truths from nature that are being taught to us through our Reiki practice. And it is a vital part, because vital meaning living part of being in the Reiki community, and it's there already. Part of this process that I'm talking about this week is just naming it, just being able to name it. And for your second question, it seems like you're equating following a form of teaching or a form of practice with regenerative thinking, sorry. And they aren't comparable. For me, it's that regenerative thinking allows me to understand that the parts and what you call guidelines maybe are a part of a whole living system. And that whole living system allows me to contact everything that I live with in a very different way, and that it's a living process. So I hope that's more clear.
Okay. Our next question that came in advance is from Gail. And Gail asked, can you practice Reiki and still practice Christianity?
Of course. I think every one of us brings into our Reiki practice an understanding of spirituality, an adaptation of a religious practice, or just as strongly, not religious practice. And all of those differences allow all of that within us, allow us to, look at things in a different way, have different perspectives, and so on. And it provides a really rich palette. But just make sure that you are holding it regeneratively rather than in the relative world and comparing it and trying to decide which one's right and wrong. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to comment that I have other spiritual paths that I practice. Specifically, I practice Judaism. And since practicing Reiki, my relationship to Jewish practice and tradition and teachings that are inherent in those practices are actually much deeper. My relationship with Reiki energy that is developed through Reiki practice informs my experience of everything else, and certainly religious practice. And I've met several people who've had similar experiences. Reiki is not a religion. It doesn't need to be in conflict, but can actually deeply inform. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Our next question is from Suzanne. And Suzanne wrote, I've been taught both of the following from different teachers. 1, place hands, surrender, and smile. In other words, no thinking required while offering Reiki. In fact, some people even have regular quiet conversations while offering, not with recipient, but with others in the room or others offering. 2, have mind completely focused on offering Reiki. Both have merit to me. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on both methods and how much attention you feel is necessary to place on the offering in the moment. Placing hands and surrendering would seem to help remove ego from the situation, but I wonder about mindfulness and presence in that case.
Well, Suzanne, this is a great question. Again, what I love about my Reiki practice is that it has given me options from the very beginning. And now I live my life kind of sometimes wishing for a more simple life because I just have so many options. I just don't know what to do with them. And this also is true about, learning different practices. One of the things is that it's very important to hold each practice as a whole, as an entity in and of itself, and not to compare them, but to be able to hold each one and allow yourself to choose which one is your option for that moment. And it's the same for these, and this detail of that falls into that place, maybe there's a situation where everybody wants to talk. I mean, I very rarely talk when I'm receiving Reiki. And there are some times when you just can't shut me up. I mean, I have no idea why, but that's just the situation. And then there are other times when any other noise, including music, just drives me crazy. So, we have to treat our Reiki practice as a living entity, as something that in the moment is just so. So one person can like silence, and one person can like music, and one person can talk all the way through their treatment. And it's important for us not to try to standardize again, but to allow ourselves to have options and to choose. Thank you.
Thank you. So our final question that came in advance is from Anne. And Phyllis, while we've been here, Anne let me know that she sent her question prematurely, and she emailed us the complete version. So I'm going to read that one, which is a little bit longer than what you've seen. So Anne, our next question comes from Anne, and she wrote, "Thank you for choosing this topic. I got my first introduction into regenerative thinking from Phyllis in 2011 and have found it highly stimulating ever since. In my partnership with Reiki, it seems to make me a more effective partner in the sense that regenerative thinking helps me to think and act less automatically and have a more systemic view. And my impression is that Reiki fully supports this direction of development. The tradition keeper in me sometimes wonders whether I am now walking two spiritual paths, having two spiritual practices, and whether this makes a difference anyway, because somehow the combination seems to flow together very smoothly. Or is this question coming too much from the relative? Confusing, something to be with for some time. What is your take on this?"
Well, when someone speaks about a spiritual path, my definition is that we, as an individual human being, we walk a spiritual path. And that spiritual path, the makeup of that spiritual path is individual and unique because of our own interests, because of the filters that we have, because of the culture that we were raised in, and so on and so on and so on. So I don't believe that as individuals we can walk two spiritual paths. I believe that we can have two spiritual practices, but regenerative thinking is not a spiritual practice. And you, in my estimation, have one spiritual path. And what's developing that path for you is your practice of Reiki, your growing understanding of regenerative thinking, and all the other things that you do in your life, like raising your child, having relationships with your family, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are close to our completion. I think there was one question we were going to come back to that I'm having a hard time finding. I think it was about cultural differences. Well, I think you responded to that, Eileen. Can you delineate some of the cultural differences and similarities that you found globally?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I see it from Eileen.
So perhaps we have responded to all of our questions. Was there another one that you remember?
No, I'd like to respond to Eileen's
Okay.
just shortly.
Okay.
Well, this could be, you know, a short response and a long response, but I'll choose the short response today. This is the interesting thing. So think about this as relative and absolute. So the differences that I see that come through often cultural filters are in the relative world. For instance, in Germany, I went there very early on in my Reiki in my Reiki life, and there, you know, systems are really important, and they caught the system of practice that they were being taught, and they held it in a way that was not like squeezing the life out of it, which was very interesting for me, but holding it so that it could live. I found this amazing because in America, you know, in the United States, we don't have a value of systems. In fact, maybe our value is to break the system. So it was just refreshing to find this quality. And then to be able to go to the Russian community, for instance. I just don't have time for lots of other communities, but for the Russian community where they held the system, but for them, because they have this tradition of storytelling and folklore, and that's how they exchange and pass on and communicate their truths of human living, is that they shifted some of the detail of the practice in order to fit their culture, which freaked me out in the beginning. And they were willing to reconsider some of those changes later on. But what I really loved is how they were wanting to follow this train of absolute, you know, very, very valued in the absolute. So the German community felt like they held the system, and in that they could see that Reiki touched them very deeply in their very most profound human place, and that system was holding that for them. In the Russian community, the system was not so important, but they got the same place that Reiki touched them profoundly as a human being and allowed them to realize that they were important as an individual as well as a part of a community. And then you go to Japan, where their life, and from the very moment that they become a member, a part of a family, they are a part of everything. They are a part of nature. They are a part of their universe. They are a part of their country and their culture. And so often it is difficult sometimes for them to be individuals. So then we come back to the American, who, you know, the individual is absolutely the priority. And in that practice, the way that Reiki practice is held is that, again, it goes to this very deep understanding of being able to take that understanding of being a part of and increase it into something that they hold not just for themselves, but for everyone on the planet. And it's really beautiful. And for them, though they practice different systems, the differences between the systems and holding to the form of a system is not so important for them as the actual practice, because in their culture, practicing is what brings them to this profound place of touching our deepest humanity. And that's the point, right? So when we can all hold the differences as wonderful flavors of ice cream. I mean, I love going to German gatherings because there's a quality about them that's really different than going to Russian gatherings than it would be if I could go to a Japanese gathering. And an American gathering, of course. So they're just very different flavors. But the quality of refreshment and profundity and core understanding of our place in our being alive, that's the similarity. And that's a total relative universe place. That's the place of the regenerative mind. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are here at our closing, and I'd like to thank everyone for being here present, whatever time and time-space reality you actually are present with us now. And thank you also to all of you who have sent us a monetary gift. We very much appreciate that. And if you're watching a replay in YouTube, again, that link is in the description below. And also go ahead and join us in the ongoing conversation by searching Global Reiki Webinars on Facebook. You'll find our group. You have to fill out a little survey in order to be added. And we really look forward to getting to know you better there and on future webinars. If you've just found us and you're watching a replay, the Facebook group is also the best place to find the invitation, the registration to join us for one of these live. And with that, let's close with a couple minutes of Reiki. So I invite you to either place your hands on yourself for self-treatment, or if it is in your practice, to send distance Reiki, I invite you to send Reiki to our collective highest purpose. You are welcome to continue intentionally sending Reiki to yourself, to our collective highest purpose, to wherever and whomever you are intentionally sending Reiki right now, for as long as it's flowing. And we are going to close out this broadcast while you do that. And it's been a pleasure to be here with you, Phyllis. Thank you for your love and your generosity of spirit and wisdom. as always. And thank you to every member of this global community for being here with us. And until next time, peace, love, and Reiki.